Okay, hi, I'm Karen Carpenter, and thank you for joining Audubon Dallas in our first webinar series, and welcome back to last night's attendees. This session is part 2, Improving the Scientific Value of Your eBird Checklists. I'd like to again extend a warm welcome to the members of Audubon Dallas and our Audubon family, including the Trinity River and Dogwood Canyon Centers, and a special welcome to our partners at Fort Worth, Prairie Timbers, and the Tyler Audubon chapter, and our friends at the North Texas Master Naturalists and the customers of Wild Birds Unlimited. And like the first session last night, please pop into the chat box and say hello and tell us where you heard about these webinars. During the presentation, feel free to ask any question you have. You can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor those questions throughout the presentation and save them for a question and answer session at the end, if they've not already been answered. After the webinars, all participants are going to be receiving a recording. So look for that in your email, along with some follow-up information from Audubon Dallas. And we are honored to have back as our presenter someone I respect immensely for being on the forefront of bird conservation in our area. Blaine Carnes is a great birder and ornithologist who works with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology as the Merlin Sound ID project coordinator for the US and Canada. He's been extensively involved in bird population monitoring projects for the past 17 years and has spent significant time working with the Institute for Bird Populations and their collaborators on the MAPS and MOSI banding programs. He spent 2 years at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History's Powder Mill Avian Research Center. He currently runs a bird monitoring program with study sites at the Trinity River Audubon Center and the John Bunker Sands wetlands. And he's managing the acoustic monitoring program for golden cheek warblers at the Dogwood Canyon Audubon Center. He is currently the regional eBird reviewer for 15 North Texas counties, and we are lucky to have him in the DFW Metroplex area. And Blaine, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Karen. And I'd like to thank everyone for wanting to spend a Friday evening listening to me talk about birds. Tonight, we'll cover ways in which you can make your eBirding more useful to both science and other members of the birding community, as well as going over some of the common questions that eBird reviewers hear from birders. Most of tonight's info can be found in eBird's help pages. And if you haven't dug into those pages, I really recommend it. They are full of useful information. I also highly recommend taking the free eBird Essentials course in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's online Bird Academy course series. If you're relatively new to birding and using eBird, it can answer many questions. And if you're an experienced eBirder, it can be a handy refresher. I have a lot of things I want to cover tonight, and I'll be moving quickly, but we will have time for some questions at the end. eBird began with the idea that every birdwatcher has unique knowledge and experience. Our goal is to gather birders' observations and use them to power data-driven approaches to science, conservation, and education. At the same time, we develop tools that make birding more rewarding, from being able to manage lists, photos, and audio recordings, to seeing real-time maps of species distribution, to alerts that let you know when species have been seen. eBird strives to provide current and useful information to the birding community. eBird is among the world's largest biodiversity-related science projects, with more than 100 million bird sightings contributed annually by eBirders around the world. In the 20-plus years since eBird's launch, it has grown into a collaborative enterprise with hundreds of partner organizations, thousands of regional experts, and hundreds of thousands of users. If you're already an eBirder, you're probably familiar with eBird's ability to keep track of what birds you've seen in which locations, its ability to alert you to interesting birds in an area, and its ability to let you know which places you might want to get out and go birding at all times of year. Keeping track of all this information used to require a combination of your own record keeping, guidebooks, and word of mouth among birders. Despite how many birders take advantage of these resources on eBird, surprisingly few take the time to explore eBird's scientific outputs or look up the ways that they can make their observations more valuable to both scientists and other birders. The first and biggest way that you can add value is to submit complete checklists. When you submit complete checklists, you tell us not only which birds you found, you tell us which species you did not observe. For example, a complete checklist tells us that you didn't report any starlings because you didn't find any, not because you intentionally included them from your list. Knowing where birds aren't is just as important as knowing where they are. Only complete checklists power eBird status and trends and many other research and conservation projects worldwide. eBird status and trends produce maps like this, showing you where you can find birds at different times of year, as well as how abundant they are in those locations. These maps have a finer scale of detail than traditional range maps and have the added benefit of the numbers data to show you where a species is most common. So as tempting as it might be to ignore your local rock pigeons, leaving them off a checklist means you aren't reporting a complete list of birds. Examples of incomplete lists include, but are not limited to, just the highlights from your birding trip, lists that exclude introduced or invasive species, and lists that omit birds you only heard but were still able to identify. A complete checklist does not mean you identified every bird to species level. There are options in eBird for reporting birds when you're not completely certain of their ID, which we'll cover later in this presentation. A complete checklist also does not mean you detected every bird that was present. That's pretty much impossible. A protocol describes how you birded and the type of checklist you're submitting. So when you're getting ready to submit an eBird checklist, select the protocol that best describes your birding activity. For most eBird users, your birding activity will be described by one of these 4 core eBird protocols. No matter which protocol you choose, make sure you have the correct time on your checklists. You don't want your sightings to be caught out at the wrong time of day. Stationary protocol is when your primary focus was birding. You know when and how long you were birding, and you essentially stayed in the same place the entire time. When submitting checklists from eBird Mobile with tracking on, the app will automatically set your observation protocol to stationary if you stay in the same spot for the duration of your list. If the GPS point wasn't well fixed and bounced around a few times, you may need to change the protocol from traveling to stationary. A typical stationary count would be sitting on your back porch with your binoculars and watching birds in your yard. This might be one of my most frequent checklist types. eBird recommends keeping stationary lists to durations of shorter than 3 hours, but if you want your stationary counts to be most useful to eBird, keep them to durations of 1 hour or less. Going beyond 1 hour increases the chances of double counting the same birds, and you're less likely to add new species. If you want to stay in the same spot for several hours, try doing multiple stationary counts of 1 hour each. That'll give really good detail on what birds were in the location at what times. Traveling protocol is what the vast majority of eBird lists use. You might have been walking a trail or a jetty, or maybe you were driving along an auto tour route at a wildlife refuge. You know where you were, when you were there, and if you're using the Tracks feature on eBird Mobile, you'll know how far you moved. To make your traveling counts really valuable to science, start new lists every time you've gone more than 3 miles, change the way in which you're birding, or have entered a significantly different habitat type. This will result in your lists having much greater accuracy in terms of the locations and habitats in which you saw those birds. So if you're out birding along the back roads in some far-flung Texas Panhandle county, following good traveling protocol habits will result in a lot of checklists. Let's say you're driving down one road that's nothing but pastures, and you turn onto a different road and immediately hit a patch of native prairie surrounding a playa covered in ducks. That sounds like a great time to start a new checklist, especially if you hop out of the vehicle and spend 20 minutes standing there with your spotting scope as you survey what's out on the water. Incidental lists are when your primary focus was not birding. You're riding down the highway with a friend on the way home from a birding trip. You want to avoid traffic in Austin, so you take the toll road around it and are zooming along at 85 miles an hour. Out the window, you see a flock of American white pelicans soaring high in the sky, and you want to put them on a checklist because they're somehow missing from your trip report. This is where you'd use the incidental protocol. There's just one species that you've seen, you're moving at 85 miles an hour, and aren't going to see and hear anything that isn't big and obvious, and you're not paying that much attention to the birds anyway. Any checklist that's under 2 minutes in duration on eBird Mobile is automatically set to incidental protocol. Realistically, you're not able to put in a complete effort in that little of amount of time. The most important thing to keep in mind about incidental protocol lists is that they are not complete checklists. Much like this semi-palmated sandpiper, you didn't see every bird in front of you. This means incidental lists are not used for any of eBird's scientific outputs. Historical protocol is when you're entering old notes from years ago. When I first started keeping notes on birds I had seen, I wrote down what day I was out birding, where I went birding, and what species I saw, but I didn't have any other information. That meant when I eventually started using eBird and entering these old lists, I'd use the historical protocol. On most of these lists, I also didn't keep track of numbers, so I had to enter an X for the count on almost every species, which brings us to the subject of counting birds. All eBirders are encouraged to make their best estimate of bird numbers on every checklist. Most bird counting is easy. You identify what you see and add the numbers together as you go. If you're using eBird Mobile, updating numbers on your checklist every 15 minutes or so usually keeps you on top of things. However, every now and then you'll be fortunate to run into a big flock of birds, multiple flocks, or big groups of mixed species. This is when it can get tricky. The most important thing to remember is that your best estimate is always more useful than putting an X. An X could mean anything from 1 to 1 million. Your best estimate provides valuable information on the abundance of birds around the world, not just where the species is, but also how many there are. This allows researchers to understand change in numbers over time, which is one of the most important measures of how well a bird species is doing. It's also important to keep in mind that general numbers are perfectly fine. If you estimate a flock as being 50 birds, in reality it was 40 or 63, percentage-wise, you're still being fairly accurate. For large groups, don't try to count every individual bird. Counting by fives, tens, hundreds, and even more lets you come up with reasonable estimates for most large flocks. You might be surprised by how many birds are in a flock once you go to the effort of counting them. There are two ways to count large flocks of moving birds, counting by groups or counting by rate. So if a single flock of several thousand birds is heading your way, count by hundreds. If you have a consistent flow of birds moving past, then you may be better served by counting rates. In this case, we have a large group of blackbirds flying past. If they're passing by a relatively consistent rate, you can count individuals for a specific unit of time, and then extrapolate the count. If you had 1,000 blackbirds in 5 minutes, and the flight remained consistent for 15 minutes, you could safely extrapolate a total of 3,000 blackbirds. Make sure that the rate stays steady, though. If the number passing by increases or decreases, you may need to adjust your math. This technique also helps with counting several species at once, which can make counting diverse flights more manageable. Multi-species flocks are the most complex challenge. There are two main approaches to counting flocks like these. One, for each species, count the total number of individuals using the best method for each, or two, estimate the total number of individuals and the proportion of each species within the flock. When you're birding in dense habitats, or birds are moving around a location, you want to make sure that you're not counting the same individual multiple times. This can feel daunting for some birders, especially with species that you hear more often than you see. Carolina wrens are typically back in dense vegetation, loud, and have a tendency to move fast across short distances. If you can hear another individual in the distance, then you have a rough idea of how far apart these birds are spacing themselves, and you can make a reasonable guess as to if you're still hearing the same bird or a different bird. Speaking of trying to find things, let's talk about choosing the correct hotspot. Hotspots are a useful way to aggregate results for popular birding locations. Some parts of the world have dozens or even hundreds of eBird hotspots, and it's important to pick the one that most closely reflects the location where you went birding. We'll use the example of Hagerman National Wildlife Refuge from here in North Texas. The overall Hagerman National Wildlife Refuge hotspot is for if you're birding the entire refuge. We can see that it lists 345 species and over 10,000 total checklists from eBirders. So what about these other 13 hotspots? All of them have Hagerman National Wildlife Refuge in their name, but also designations for specific parts of the refuge. If you were just including birds that you saw at the low water crossing to the north of refuge headquarters, you'd use the Myers Branch Inlet sub-hotspot. Now, it's important to note that some of these hotspots are very close together and have similar names, so you need to make sure you're choosing the right one when you pick your location. You don't want to list a bunch of ducks and shorebirds for a sub-hotspot that covers a trail through the woods. One of the benefits of using sub-hotspots is that you're giving information to scientists and other birders about specific locations and habitats where you saw the birds. Imagine how hard it might be finding a rare bird at a place like Hagerman if the only location information you had was the main refuge hotspot. At the moment, these sub-hotspots are all independent of one another, but we've got some exciting hotspot developments in the works at eBird. And one goal is to link sub-hotspots to a main hotspot location. This means that at some point in the next few years, any checklist submitted for one of these Hagerman sub-hotspots will automatically contribute to the overall refuge hotspot. If no existing hotspot describes your location or route, use a personal location. In areas with few hotspots, personal locations are often more accurate for describing where you went birding. If you went birding along county roads somewhere in Texas, you might be miles from the closest hotspot. Here we have a satellite view of Ellis, Navarro, Henderson, and southern Kaufman counties. The few hotspot markers, which all have a little flame on the pin, are clustered around parks and lakes. The rest of these markers are for personal locations. If you make a personal hotspot for a location in the field, then later realize an existing hotspot would have been equally appropriate for that list, you can merge your personal location with that hotspot. This will move all checklists from the personal location to the hotspot. If you're using eBird Mobile and you don't select a hotspot or a previous personal location before submitting a checklist, the app will automatically fill in your location with the GPS point or address of where you started the checklist. We encourage eBirders to rename their new locations to something more useful. For example, would you want to try refinding a short-eared owl at a place with the first name, or would you prefer the second name? Another thing to keep in mind is that it's helpful to reuse personal locations multiple times instead of creating lots of new locations in a small area. If you regularly make checklists while walking around your neighborhood, you may want to merge those lists into a single neighborhood location rather than marking 80 different GPS points for 80 similar walking routes. Let's talk about eBird Tracks. eBird Mobile uses GPS tracks to automatically record distance for you, and the eBird science team uses these tracks to obtain more precise bird location information. While you can't change your path, you can change where the track starts and ends along your route. Many of us have had the experience of stopping birding, getting in a car, and driving home, only to realize we forgot to stop the checklist and the track recorded our drive home. This is where you can edit the track to correct that mistake. What if you backtrack? The most recent update to eBird Mobile includes a development that accounts for backtracking. Now the app only calculates what's called the unique distance of your route. This means if your phone's GPS records you going back over the same points, so if you go one way on a trail and then go back along that route to get to a different trail, it only counts those points toward the distance traveled once. On this track at Dogwood Canyon Audubon Center, I actually walked about 3.5 miles in total. But because some of that involved backtracking along the same trails, the track's unique distance was 2.2 miles. The two key points to tracks are that they give us better information on habitat, and that they give an accurate representation of where we bird at large hotspots and other locations. We really want eBirders to have accurate track locations on their checklists. Track information isn't visible on eBird's public pages. Other than the eBird science team, only you and people with whom you share a checklist can see your tracks. Speaking of sharing checklists, let's say you and half your coworkers on Merlin are at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in upstate New York, and you hear about a snowy owl at a nearby airfield, and all of you want to go see it. You bundle up and pile into a couple of cars and drive up there. Because you're all in one group and seeing all or nearly all the same birds, it makes sense to only have one eBird checklist that you share. That checklist can be shared with the people you birded with using their eBird usernames or email addresses. This is important. To receive shared checklists, your email address in eBird must be up to date. There are options to share checklists on both the web version of eBird and on eBird Mobile. On the website, there will be a share button to the right of your name on the checklist page. On eBird Mobile, if you increase the number of observers before you submit the list, an option to share the checklist will appear. Tap that, enter either their eBird username or email address, and then submit the list to automatically share it. If you want your personal list to be different from the shared group list, maybe you saw a species that others didn't, or vice versa, you can edit your list once people have started accepting it. Now, a common question eBirders tend to ask is what the symbols in eBird Mobile next to species names mean when you're entering a checklist. No dot means a species is common, and the 20 by 20 kilometer grid square where you are on eBird's global map, at least 6% of checklists within 3 weeks of your current date have that species. An orange half circle means infrequent. The species has been on at least one, but fewer than 6% of checklists in that grid square at that time of year. A red dot means unreported. No checklists in that grid square at that time period have registered the species. Not all red dot species are flagged as rare. In eBird Mobile, anything rare will be marked with the letter R on the right side of the screen. Whether a species is rare is determined by regional filters set by volunteer data editors. Unlike the rare designation, which is defined by a filter for the entire region, colored dots are determined by the proportion of complete checklists containing that species at the local level. Species with red dots have not been reported on any checklist from that area in 3-week period in the last 10 years, but they may not be unusual enough to be considered rare by eBird's data filters. It could just mean that no one has birded an area recently or seen that species recently. So why are some birds rare when I keep seeing them reported? This is a question that reviewers get on a near constant basis. The same goes for specific locations where a species occurs in high number and gets flagged for that number. Maybe an individual from a rare species has been in location for several weeks or months, or there's a spot where a species can always be found with flags as rare for the area. Reviewers use a number of considerations to set the expected filter values for a region. Sometimes regular species that are hard to identify, or species restricted to 1 or 2 sites will be flagged so that potential errors are more easily caught. Well-documented rarities from continuing locations may be flagged, but are usually quickly processed. Let's walk through a couple of examples from North Texas to go over why this happens. The first example is ladder-backed woodpecker. Ladder-backed woodpeckers are a species of dry, open habitats. In most of Texas, they are very tied to the presence of mesquite trees. Historically, they would have been spread throughout North Texas, back when the dominant habitat type here was blackland prairie. However, development and the rapidly increasing sprawl of the Metroplex has significantly reduced the amount of available ladder-backed woodpecker habitat in the area. The filter system in eBird is based on set geographic boundaries. In most of the US, filters are based on county lines. Here's a portion of the Dallas County filter for woodpeckers. Ladder-backed woodpecker is the 5th species down, and the filter is set so the acceptable number for this species on a checklist in the county is 0. The species will flag as rare on any checklist in the county. So why is this species set to 0, even though you can find them here year-round? The map of where ladder-backed woodpecker sightings occur in the county shows why. There's still some acceptable mesquite habitat along the western edge of the county from Cedar Hill up to Valley Ranch, but there are essentially no other documented sightings of the species outside of that strip, and most of those other records are decades old. Less than 10% of the county still has suitable habitat for the species. If it wasn't listed as rare for the county, then data entry mistakes and misidentifications of downy and red-bellied woodpeckers could seriously skew this distribution map. And at the rate we're losing habitat, it probably won't be long before this species starts getting flagged for Tarrant County too. Now for another example, fish crow. Fish crows are slightly smaller than American crows and are best told apart by their short, nasal-sounding caws. Fish crows only started spreading into the Metroplex in the past 20 years. This species is a habitat specialist. They prefer forested bottomlands along rivers and large creeks. They're along the Red River as far west as Cook County, where Interstate 35 crosses into Oklahoma. At some point in the past 2 decades, some wandering fish crows from that Red River population found the swampy section at the Herd Museum in McKinney and successfully nested. Ever since then, they have very slowly been spreading along the rivers and creeks in Collin, Denton, and Dallas counties. Looking at the Dallas County map for fish crow, we see that they're along Rowlett Creek in the northeast, the lower portion of Duck Creek, in the Great Trinity Forest south of downtown, and there have been some scattered recent sightings along White Rock Lake and White Rock Creek. On top of this species being found in 3 narrow areas, they're difficult to ID when compared to American crows, especially in late spring and summer when juvenile American crows leave the nest and still have slightly squeaky voices. There are plenty of other examples of species that are flagged because they're only in a few locations in a county. I'm sure every review area in the state has a few. Another regular example of rare birds that stay for a long time, such as this hooded warbler that's been at Red River Legacy Park in Tarrant County this summer. Hooded warblers are rare for this part of Texas. We might get a few during migration, but this is a species of eastern forests that just barely gets into East Texas. Just because this one bird has been hanging around for weeks doesn't mean we can change the data filter in the area for the species. This is true even when individuals linger for years. For close to a decade, there were 2 greater white-fronted geese at Southside Water Treatment Plant in Dallas that had stopped migrating for some reason. You'd find them hanging out with Canada geese at the pond by the headquarters all summer. These 2 geese stayed until they shuffled off to the great grassy lawn and the sky, but just 2 individuals in one location wasn't enough for a filter change, even though they were a Southside staple. So when a bird or a count flags on a checklist, what do? We need to provide documentation to help back up our sighting and let it go into eBird's scientific database. Documentation is written comments, photographs, sound recordings, or videos of a bird or birds that provide key evidence for supporting unusual observations, such as rare birds or big numbers. Remember, eBird is a scientific database, so our notes and photos and audio are essential for future birders and scientists to be able to evaluate our records. When eBird's automated data quality filters detect an unusual species or count on your checklist, you may not be able to submit the checklist without first adding some comments about that observation. If you are asked to document an unusual count of a species, you should take a picture or recording of the flock, or you could describe how you counted following the techniques we discussed earlier. Do not use photos and audio recordings from other dates, locations, or people as documentation. Any media should be taken by you at the same time as the checklist because it is supposed to reflect that observation. Photos and recordings are the best documentation possible. Even poor quality media can confirm an identification. It's a win-win scenario. You have a permanent free archive of your rare bird documentation in eBird, and your media will contribute to the scientific archive in Macaulay Library. You don't need a fancy camera or expensive recording setup to provide physical documentation. A digiscope photograph taken through your binoculars or a sound recording on your smartphone is still documentation and still valuable. A detailed, thorough written description of what you saw or heard can be extremely helpful with or without physical evidence. Writing down your observations in the field will improve your skills and help you get more out of birding. Accurately conveying what you observed is the most valuable thing you can do in a written description, either how you counted birds for a high count, or what field marks you observed for a rare species. So what makes for a good bird description? This list goes from most useful to least useful. First, note diagnostic features. Most birds have unique traits that distinguish them from even very similar looking relatives, so include the notable characteristics that help you identify an unusual bird. Explain how similar species were eliminated. This category is often more valuable than the description of the bird itself. Sometimes this isn't needed. It's hard to confuse anything with an adult male painted bunting. What about birds with look-alike relatives? If you're reporting an out-of-range glossy ibis, the description, tall, dark bird, glossy reddish and brown, long down-curved bill, pale lines on face, could also describe the white-faced ibis in this photo. Make detailed notes in the field. The best time to write down your observations is right as you are seeing or hearing them. In eBird Mobile, you can write it down right into the app. What did the bird look like? What's its behavior? Does it vocalize? Even if you get a photo, video, or sound recording, descriptions are still immensely helpful. Note the age and sex. When it can be determined, age and sex of a bird can be a key part of a description. Many birds look drastically different depending on these factors, which can make them much easier or much harder to identify. Recognize the rarity of the sighting. Maybe you found a common migrant, but it's a few weeks early, or you've come across a rare bird that's never been reported before in your county. If you're aware of factors like these, mention them so that others know you knew the bird was unusual and weren't just dismissing the data filter. Is it a known individual? This would be something like the hooded warbler or white-fronted geese from earlier. And for birds that are habitat specialists, it's important to know what sort of habitat you saw them in. These are examples of unhelpful descriptions that reviewers often get on checklists. In a tree. Good, most birds happen to sit in trees. We're down to about 8,000 possible species now. Singing. Excellent. Outside of vultures and pelicans, most birds do make noise. What exactly did it sound like? I have seen many of these. Can you perhaps describe what it looked like so that we know what you thought you saw? Counted them. This often shows up for high counts that get flagged. A description of how you counted the birds, like what we went over earlier, will let us know how you got this number. Closest match I could find online. From what reference? A credible source? A fictional source? Somebody's AI art with 3 legs and a second head. What else could it be? Well, for all I know, without a description, it could have been anything from a weather balloon to a plucked chicken. Continuing. We'll often accept records like this when a rare bird has stuck around for a while, but we would really prefer to have better notes than this. Confirmed by Merlin. For one, Merlin only offers suggestions. It does not confirm sightings. For two, if Merlin gave you a suggestion, then you likely have either a photo or an audio recording of this bird, both of which would be excellent forms of documentation if you uploaded them to your checklist. There are 5 main takeaways we want people to know about the review process. Data quality is essential to eBird. Whether you're using eBird to find birds, conduct research, conserve birds, or teach others, access to reliable, accurate data is critical. Understanding and taking part in the data quality process is one of the most important parts of being an eBirder. Document your unusual observations. Regional reviewers may email you for more information about an unusually high count or rare species. You can reduce your chances of being contacted by providing a detailed description and adding images or sound recordings to your checklist. If you say an ID came from Merlin, we will have to have the photo or audio file in order to review the record. Review can happen for both specific observations and for entire checklists. Most review is for an observation of a rare species or a high count. However, occasionally you may be contacted by a reviewer about an entire checklist. Examples here might be a distance of 30 miles on a list, or a list plotted at an incorrect location, or a list that was meant for 9 o'clock in the morning that was listed at 9 o'clock at night. Read and respond to review emails you receive. Consider a note from an eBird reviewer as an opportunity to learn new birding skills from an expert source. And reviewers are volunteers. Don't take review personally and be respectful. Every person who reaches out about one of your sightings is volunteering their time to help you and ensure that eBird's database of records is as accurate as possible. This isn't singling you out personally. It's just a request for more information on unusual records for that location and date. When a record gets flagged for being rare or for being an unexpectedly high count, it appears in a records queue like this so one of eBird's local volunteer reviewers can evaluate. An unusual or flagged observation will not appear publicly until a reviewer has evaluated it. Reviewers evaluate records and determine whether they have enough supporting information to be accepted. If there is not enough supporting documentation, an observation is unconfirmed and will only be visible to the birder who reported it. Processing records takes just a few seconds when observations are well documented with detailed notes, photos, or recordings. The review queue can be organized in different ways, but the default sorting puts the newest records at the top. In some cases, this results in older records waiting a while to be reviewed. When we're reviewing records, we have 3 options. Accepting the record is straightforward. We think there's enough documentation to go in the database. Deferring a record is when there aren't enough details yet, but it seems like there might be better details available. For example, if you say you got photos or audio of the bird, I'll defer the record until those photos are added. This way, if the wrong photo is added or the bird was misidentified, the record hasn't been confirmed yet. It's much harder to track down and fix mistakes like that in the database than it is to wait on accepting until all the information is in. Unconfirming the record is when the details aren't enough to back up the record or the bird has been misidentified. On this example record, we can see the birder wrote a lot of details and had audio recordings. The record's history showed that it was deferred until audio was added. This is a record that I would accept. Moving on, let's talk about photos and audio in eBird. All photos and audio you add to eBird checklist become part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Macaulay Library collection. The lab and hundreds of other scientists around the world can access them for research purposes or for presentations like this one. Multiple eBirders have asked me if they should rate their own photos and audio. The answer is yes. Ratings increase the utility of Macaulay Library media for everyone, enabling the best images, audio, and video to be discovered and used in projects such as Merlin and Birds of the World, as well as illustrated checklists and external research applications. You can rate your own media when you add it to your eBird checklist, as well as any photo, audio recording, or video that you find in the Macaulay Library. For all three media types, keep in mind that the rating should be based on technical quality and not the rarity of the bird. Please rate media honestly. Attempts to manipulate the rating system and use multiple personal accounts to rate media is not allowed. The eBird programming team does have tools for keeping track of accounts that seem to give skewed ratings to photos and audio, and there have been instances where they have removed people's ability to rate media because of serious abuse of the system. When rating photos, rate the quality of the image, not the quality of the bird or observation. A great photo of a common drab bird should still be 5 stars, and a poor photo of a rare or hard to photograph bird could still only be 1 or 2 stars. When rating, please consider the photo guidelines found in eBird's help pages, as well as the following factors. Is the target bird clear and in focus? How well can you see the bird? If the bird is very small, partially obstructed from view, or backlit in the photo, the rating should be lower. Tiny photos should have lower star ratings. Lower a rating depending on size and obtrusiveness of a watermark if one is present. It is an automatic 1-star rating for anything that doesn't follow eBird's photo guidelines. This includes composite photos, back of camera shots, and photos with obtrusive graphics or extreme editing. For flocks, rate flock photos based on the quality of the image rather than the visibility of the individual birds. Is the overall flock in focus, well lit, and in high resolution? For birds in hand, photos like this are critical for illustrating plumages and molts and add significant value to the standard ornithological practice of bird banding. Please rate images of in-hand birds based on photo quality. Do not intentionally downrate images of birds in the hand because you don't agree with the practice. In-hand photos should also be tagged as in-hand during upload. So how can you make your photos more useful? First, don't add watermarks. Watermarks can obscure context in a photo and can cause significant problems for machine learning projects like Merlin Photo ID. Your photos are automatically copyrighted when you upload them to eBird checklists, making watermarks unnecessary. Even bad photos are useful to Merlin and scientists, sometimes much more useful than you would think. Don't just take photos of pretty birds. I'll go into more detail on this one in a bit. And lastly, use tags. Photos of birds doing things are important. These photos show off all kinds of postures and behaviors. Because many of the available photo tags on the Manage Media page indicate behavior and could mean that birds are doing something interesting in a photo. Photos with tags like this Bullock's Oriole photo are automatically prioritized for use in Merlin. You can find all kinds of neat things with tags when you search in Macaulay Library. Like this photo of yellow warblers with a preening, scratching, bathing tag, or this vermilion flycatcher with a feeding young tag, or this great-tailed grackle with a molting tag. I've used photos from Macaulay Library as data for scientific papers about molt and tropical birds. When I mentioned that we want people to take photos of ugly birds, molting individuals were at the top of my mind. One thing that we found in my papers, and also in similar papers by other researchers, is that the library is very biased toward photos of adult males in pristine breeding plumage. In some instances, over 80% of photos for a species are adult males. I can understand that. Many photographers want to show off what they think are their prettiest images, but when it comes to things like Merlin Photo ID, that bias toward pretty pictures can really skew the available data. Studying different plumage patterns in a species and seeing at what time of year birds replace feathers is incredibly valuable information. Molt is just as important, if not more important to birds than nesting and migration. It is the one thing that all birds do every year. As an aside, 3 months ago, we added the ability for people to add what's called checklist level media to their eBird checklists. This includes photos of habitats at a location, soundscape audio recordings that have several species of birds without a focal species, photos about the experience of birding at a site, such as trail maps or other unique moments, and the ability to add photos and sound recordings of other animals. As of this week, we're up to 160,000 habitat photos, almost 30,000 soundscape recordings, and 142,000 photos and 36,000 sound recordings of other animals. One of the key things about habitat photos is that when you upload them, you can tag what species of birds you saw in these habitats. Almost 3,500 species of birds have been tagged in habitat photos so far. Our goal is to use this information to build up what we know about the habitats you can find birds, which is lacking in many parts of the world. We'll use this photo set to verify habitat at a site against other information sources, such as satellite imagery, and eventually start adding habitat photos to Merlin and to eBird's hotspot pages. Now moving on to audio. For a 5-star audio recording, the target bird is loud and clear on the spectrogram with a minimal amount of background birds and background noise, which results in a clean white background. There are other factors to consider as well. Is a recording long enough to be useful for science and projects like Merlin Sound ID? Merlin needs recordings that are at least 9 seconds long, but 30 seconds or more is ideal. Is a recording in a high-quality format like a WAV file as opposed to a compressed format like MP3? For folks old enough to remember this, the sound quality difference between WAV and MP3 is like the difference between a vinyl record in the first few years of CDs. A WAV file is a smooth quality that records the entire sound frequency and duration, while MP3 samples most but not all of the sound, leading to a slightly staticky result at high resolutions. Additionally, when rating audio, listen to the whole recording. Be sure to listen to more than just the first few seconds. In many cases, quality improves later in the recording as a result of the recordist moving closer to the target bird, and such recordings should be rated based on their best section. Handling noise. If a recording contains a significant amount of handling noise, noise made by the recordist by moving or hitting a microphone, consider deducting 1 star from the score. The top image here is an example of a recording with prominent handling noise. Recording level. Don't be fooled by a predominantly white spectrogram like the second one. It might seem like a high-quality recording because of low background noise. However, high-quality recordings contain a quiet background and strong target sounds. In this spectrogram, the target sounds are barely visible and barely audible. Recordings like this should only receive 1 star or 2 star rating. This also emphasizes the importance of normalizing your recordings before uploading, making it easier to hear and assess quality of a recording. Extreme editing. If you see a spectrogram like the third one, with large portions of its audio deleted, give the recording a 1 or 2 star rating depending on the severity. In this case, the editing is very extreme. All sounds above 2 kHz frequency was removed, and it sounds unnatural. Compare that recording with the bottom one, which is the same species. Above the 2 kHz frequency, there are a lot of harmonic tones that were removed by that editing process. I've already mentioned recording in WAV format, but this is an important point to repeat. Merlin Sound ID records in WAV, which makes it a good recording program. Want to make the target bird in your recording twice as loud? Get halfway closer to the bird. This has the additional benefit of reducing any far-off background noise. Make sure not to get so close that you disturb the bird, though. Aiming your microphone at the bird will also increase the volume and make the sound come through with fewer echoes. I mentioned the 9-second cutoff for making audio useful for Merlin. Try making even longer recordings. The most valuable recordings are ones that capture many songs or calls, or capture the variation of songs and calls. If you can, it's worth recording for several minutes. However, also consider whether you can get closer or make another adjustment to obtain a better recording. The better the quality of the recording, the more worthwhile it is to keep going. And the longer you record, the more likely it is your subject will do something interesting. Microphones are sensitive and will pick up everything around them. Our brains can tune out traffic, airplanes, and moving water, but these show up as unwanted background noise in recordings. Also, nothing is closer to the microphone than you. Try not to move, walk, talk, or otherwise make noise during a recording, and ask anyone with you to do the same. Minimize handling noise by being careful about how you hold your microphone or recording device. Make a voice announcement. It's easy to lose track of what happened during a recording, especially if you're cataloging it days or weeks after it was made. Making a voice announcement can help you and future listeners find out what was going on and capture information that may be relevant to sounds the bird made. Describe basic information such as species, date, time, and location. Most importantly, describe the behavior of the bird. Habitat, weather, and recording equipment can also be useful to mention. If you do want to take the extra step of improving your audio recordings, follow these steps. Record and submit WAV files. Trim the ends of the recording. The beginning of a sound file is often the messiest part. Try to leave a lead-in of just 3 seconds of background noise before the first target sound. If there's handling noise or a loud background species during these first few seconds, you can shorten this. After the last target sound, include another 3 seconds of background sound before the end. If you don't have much background audio to work with, that's fine too. Just don't add blank audio or manufacture background sound. Boost the volume. This is called normalizing in sound programs. Even when you're close to a bird and have made a great recording, chances are the bird sound could still benefit from being boosted a few decibels. We ask that you adjust the level of each recording so that the loudest sound reaches -3 decibels, otherwise known as normalizing. This makes it easier to hear the target sound and creates a consistent listening experience between recordings across the archive. Leaving a recording at low volume does not reduce background noise, it only makes the entire recording harder to hear. Human voice announcements, on the other hand, tend to sound loud compared to birdsong, so keep the peak level for those announcements at -10 decibels. Group recordings of the same bird together. When a bird is cooperative and you're able to make multiple recordings of the same individual, prepare each sound file as described above, and then group the files into a single file with 1 second of silence between each segment. The combined file is the one that should be uploaded to eBird. The idea is for your finished file to represent a single recording event, even if it was originally broken into several files. This lets researchers know that the whole recording is the same individual or group of individuals and paints a more complete picture of the recording event. If you record one sound file from one individual and then record a second sound file from a different individual, do keep those separate. Keep it continuous. If you make a long continuous recording of a bird that vocalizes infrequently, such as an owl, keep the entire recording. There's valuable information in the silence between songs, information that is lost if a continuous recording is chopped up into many short segments. Append voice announcements. If you make voice announcements in the field, you can tack these on to the end of a bird recording in an editing program. Avoid filters and cosmetic editing. Sound editing software is a very powerful tool. It can be tempting to remove background sounds from your recordings, but we encourage you to give us recordings that include what you heard and recorded in the field, even if it's not all pretty. Manipulating your recordings in this way can make them unuseful for scientific research or sound unnatural. Similarly, apply filters only when necessary. If a strong, low-frequency sound, such as wind or distant road noise, is masking the target sound, apply a gentle high-pass filter at 250 Hz or less. If the target bird sound is already the loudest sound in a recording, there's no need to filter the recording. Noise reduction and other extreme editing techniques should never be used when editing your recordings for upload to eBird. They will badly distort the sound quality. So here's a recording of a Dark-Eyed Junco song in sound editing software before and after editing. In the before, there are several seconds of handling noise at the start, and another clunk at the end. And the bird song isn't particularly loud. It's not a bad recording, but it could definitely be better. In the after, The clunks at the beginning and end have been trimmed off, and the sound has been normalized so the loudest portions are at that -3 decibel level. If you uploaded this edited file, it would have a bold black signal on the spectrogram for the Junko song and a clean white background with just some low-level background noise. For Merlin Sound ID, we're still looking for more recordings of common species that are already in the model. For example, just because there are thousands of song sparrow recordings in eBird doesn't mean we have a lot from all the different parts of their range. Merlin might be performing worse in one part of the range for a species like this that have regionally variable songs. I'm sure everyone around here has noticed that it has trouble with Buick's wrens in the spring because our Buick's wrens sound like West Coast song sparrows. Add any and all recordings because they're all potentially useful, especially if there are background species in a recording. Additionally, if you want to really make a recording useful for scientific use, fill in the metadata fields and tags on the Manage Media page when you upload a recording. Two of the most useful specifically for Merlin are the sound tags and the additional species fields. Now, the reason additional species are especially important is because part of the major process for training Merlin Sound ID involves going through and marking the main species and any nearby background species in an audio file through a process called annotation. It is much easier to mark the background species when those are already listed in the file metadata. At the moment, there's no way to directly add Merlin recordings to an eBird checklist. The programming team has this feature on their lengthy to-do list, but I understand that it's apparently going to be monstrously complicated given how both eBird and Merlin are structured right now. In the meantime, we do have these relatively simple steps for adding Merlin recordings, which you can find in eBird's help section on Merlin. We also get asked a lot about the ability to add video clips to eBird checklists. Video takes up more digital storage space than photos and audio, and there have been concerns at Macaulay Library about the potential for hundreds of thousands of video clips to gobble up storage on the servers. As a result, video is currently limited to a relatively small pool of eBird users, because Macaulay wants to emphasize videos that capture noteworthy bird behavior and high-quality video. I won't really go into how to rate videos as a result of this, but you can look up the video rating guidelines in the eBird help pages if you want to check them out. Up next, should I guess on a bird ID? In short, no. It might be tempting to guess when you see something extremely difficult to ID like this baby bird, but there are lots of available options in eBird to make cautious IDs if you aren't certain of a bird's exact species. The main options for things that aren't species are hybrids, slashes, and spuzz. So what are these three options? A hybrid is any bird that is a result of a cross between two species. Bird genetics are very different from mammal genetics, so many different types of birds are capable of hybridizing in the wild. Ducks are one group where this can be fairly frequent, like this male hybrid cross between a gadwall and a mallard. If you want to learn more about bird hybrids from one of the global experts of bird hybridization, I recommend the fantastic presentation on hybrids led by Sean Billerman on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's YouTube channel from the Birds of the World webinar series. A slash is when you know the bird you're seeing or hearing is one of two or three different species, but you can't narrow it down to which of those it is. The example here is alder and willow flycatchers. The two species look almost identical. There are slight differences in color, head shape, and wingtip shape, but the best way to tell the two apart is by their very different songs and calls. If you see one of these two species and it isn't calling or giving you the sort of great look that it often takes to identify them to one species or the other, you can mark them as alder/willow flycatcher. Spuzz are for when you can't narrow the ID down to just one or two species. Take this large group of small sandpipers. There are a few white-rump sandpipers in this photo, but the group seems to have multiple size categories flying by. There might be 3 or maybe even 4 other species in the group. Because they're in motion and hard to ID, it's best to identify them all as peep spud, the category for a group of unidentified small sandpipers. Another example might be a large flock of blackbirds flying into a roost site for the evening as they're starting to lose daylight, like from a few slides back. Moving on, let's go over the eBird exotics codes. Whenever you see a bird species that isn't native to an area, it will appear on your list with one of these 3 symbols. Let's go into what these mean and cover a couple examples of how they can apply here in Texas. A naturalized species was introduced to an area. and its population in that area has grown very large. The population is breeding in the wild, has persisted for many years, and is not maintained through ongoing releases. These species are counted in eBird totals. European starlings in North America are one example. The population here came from 100 individuals that were released in New York in about 1890. They've spread throughout the US and Canada, as far north as Alaska, and down into Latin America. Rock pigeons and house sparrows in North America are other examples of naturalized populations. Provisional birds fall into two categories. Category 1 is a population breeding in the wild that has persisted for many years, but not yet reached a certain threshold to be considered naturalized, like this Egyptian goose in Texas. Category 2 is for rare birds where it seems possible that the bird may not have arrived at that location on its own. It could have been either held in captivity and escaped, or isn't likely to have reached the area without significant human assistance. The cattle tyrant in Corpus Christi is an example of this. They're spreading into Central America because of deforestation, but a very slow spread, and there haven't been prior examples of one showing up hundreds or thousands of miles away from a known location. This bird was also heavily molting when it first appeared in Corpus 2 years ago, and songbirds don't migrate at that stage of molt. On top of that, it's from the non-migratory northern subspecies in Colombia and Venezuela. It seems very likely that this individual rode into Corpus Christi on a boat, and since then, it spent its time dumpster diving at a sushi restaurant. Provisional birds also count in eBird totals. Lastly, we have escapee. Escapees are birds that are either known to have escaped from captivity or seem extremely unlikely to have arrived in an area on their own. Ruddy shelducks like this one and other exotic waterfowl are often kept in captivity, and when they escape, they tend to find their way to locations where native waterfowl hang out. Escape parrots are another common example. Now let's move on to a more tricky situation with exotic codes here in the DFW Metroplex. If you've seen a northern bobwhite within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in the past 10 years, odds are your sighting has a little orange asterisk next to it. This is because the native population of bobwhite in this area has been exterminated due to habitat loss from development, and nearly all recent records have come from birds being released by humans, such as the population at Connemara Meadow where this bird was photographed. There have been ongoing releases of bobwhites at Connemara for several years now, and at least early on these birds were roosting in a shed at night. Off and on, they've wandered into surrounding neighborhoods, and individuals have gotten as far as Oak Point Park on the other side of Highway 75, but they tend to disappear pretty quickly as they get eaten by predators and struck by cars. So why are these birds listed with an exotic code? When we check all eBird records from around Dallas, it looks like northern bobwhite is widespread, and historically that was absolutely the case. I remember coveys of bobwhite running along behind my backyard in Capel in the late 80s and early 90s when I was a little kid. However, the relentless pace of development over the last 35 years has steadily eaten away at large patches of tall native grasses, resulting in the species essentially vanishing from North Texas. When we go to records from the past 10 years, we see a significant reduction in grid squares with any records, and the first records of birds that were obviously released. When we look at records from just this year, the only bobwhite records within the Metroplex are the Connemara birds. Every other record is from locations that haven't been developed and still have grassland habitat for now. While Connemara Preserve is located along the creek corridor that runs down to Oak Point Park, a few miles further south, there really aren't any avenues of appropriate habitat for bobwhite to disperse out of the location or for other bobwhite to come in. Especially because, as we can see here, the closest locations that might still have habitat are close to 30 miles away in northeast Collin County and getting further with every new housing development. The only thing keeping the Connemara population going and preventing them from getting incredibly inbred within just a few generations is continued releases of new birds. Typically, reintroduction efforts of native species are assigned a code of provisional, such as the Outwaters prairie chicken work being done down on the coastal prairie. However, the discussion I had with eBird staff about these bobwhite a few years ago led to them getting the escapee code because 1, there is no work being done in the surrounding area to improve their habitat. 2, there is only one site that is releasing birds. And 3, suitable habitat for the species in the region is rapidly vanishing. Other locations in the east half of the US are experiencing the same scenario with bobwhite and are also coding them as escapee. Now, let's look at a much easier decision about how to apply an exotic code. The chicken. Red junglefowl are native to South and Southeast Asia, but a long time ago, humanity decided that they were our favorite bird, and we have spread them all over the world. There are feral populations on many Pacific islands that resemble the wild ones, but individuals like this are decidedly not very wild-looking. If you saw this bird in most parts of Texas, it's best to assume he's part of a free-range flock and does not belong on an eBird checklist. The same goes for groups of helmeted guinea fowl and other birds often found on farms. Now let's talk about Merlin. I work on Merlin. I'm the project coordinator for the US and Canada portion of Sound ID. I wish I could tell you that Merlin was an infallible bird ID machine, but it isn't. Merlin is a tool for helping people learn about birds and determining the ID of birds. We're constantly working on upgrades to the photo ID and sound ID models, with the goals of increasing accuracy and adding additional species. For something that fits on our phones, photo ID and sound ID do an absolutely incredible job at recognizing photos and audio. However, predictions that Merlin makes are only suggestions, and Merlin can make mistakes. You should always independently verify a Merlin suggestion before you report it to an eBird checklist. Your eyes and ears and brain are the best birding ID tools available. Remember, Merlin is a machine that recognizes patterns, and while those pattern recognition skills are quite good, they can have strong blind spots. Just in the same way that you wouldn't want a surgeon to use a large language model AI program like ChatGPT to tell them what to do in the operating room, you shouldn't blindly accept a Merlin suggestion when you're birding. That said, there are some great ways to use Merlin to help with bird ID. If anyone's added photos to an eBird checklist since early May, you may have noticed a new feature on the Manage Media page. Last winter, Sam Heinrich, one of the computer science members of the Merlin team, completely overhauled Merlin's photo ID system. Not only is the version of photo ID in Merlin app better than ever, the version of photo ID running on the Cornell Lab servers is even more powerful. The programming team integrated this version of photo ID into the Manage Media page so that every time you upload a photo to an eBird checklist, photo ID checks to see if it can find and identify any birds in the photo. If photo ID can't find the bird that you've identified in the photo and can find what it thinks is another bird, it might offer a suggestion of a different ID. The Managed Media version of photo ID is currently very cautious. It only offers alternative IDs if it scores the initial ID as less than 5% likely and is at least 70% confident that another bird species is in the photo. For example, here are two photos of the same red-tailed hawk. These photos were initially uploaded as a red-shouldered hawk. In the first photo, this hawk is slightly hunched. There are some branches in the way, and conditions are drizzly, resulting in photo ID having only a 0.665 confidence that this is actually a red-tail, just under the threshold to suggest that ID to the person who uploaded it. In the second photo, the bird has spread its wings, revealing that distinctive dark patagial bar on the underside, and photo ID now has a 0.913 confidence that this is a red tail, resulting in it giving a confident disagreement with the initial ID. Because this tool is currently very cautious, sometimes it won't be able to find birds in a photo. So if you have a photo of a snipe half hidden in the grass, or if there's a Canada goose taking up most of the photo space and the teal you are actually photographing is in the corner, then it might give an incorrect suggestion. To get the best results from Sound ID, follow these practices. First, remember Merlin can make mistakes. Bird ID suggestions, it gives you our starting point, and before reporting suggestions on an eBird checklist, you should verify them by seeing and hearing a bird for yourself. Second, set your location. Merlin is most accurate when you allow it to use location services on your phone. Otherwise, it'll make predictions based on all the birds in the world rather than expected species in your area. Third, try to add some of your recordings from Merlin to an eBird checklist. The recordings will go into the archive and help Merlin become more accurate. If it suggests a rare species, then definitely add that recording to your checklist. Remember, audio recordings are a great form of documentation. Fourth, before you upload recordings, follow eBird's audio editing and preparation guidelines to make your recordings better quality. And lastly, use good recording techniques. Get closer to birds so they sound louder in a recording, and don't walk or talk when Merlin is running, because loud background sounds make it less accurate. Sound ID works best in short intervals, so keep recordings just a few minutes at a time. Do all these, and you'll be like Grant, who programs Sound ID, as seen here with a mic hooked up to his phone out in the desert somewhere. We've covered a lot of different topics tonight, and I'd like to thank all of you for spending your evening listening to me, and more importantly, for taking the time to contribute your birding observations to eBird. By adding your sightings to eBird, you're not only getting out and enjoying birds in your area, you're participating in one of the largest scientific collaborations the world has ever seen. And for those of you who don't want to immediately take off for the evening, I can stick around a little while longer and answer any questions that folks have.
Hey, Ben, we had three questions in the chat. The first one was, if I'm out and my phone dies while I'm running a checklist and I continue on, my birding, is there a way to update the track to show my entire walk, or is it only just updating the mileage and the distance of that track?
No, you won't be able to continue that track, but you will be able to adjust it later on the web version of eBird if you go into the checklist once you're done.
Okay. Um,
Hopefully, it's going out birding with a fully charged phone if you're using eBird mobile.
the second question was, how do you tag photos?
That is on the Manage Media page. So when you upload a photo, there's a column on the right side that lists a lot of different things. You can put in additional species in the photo or a sound recording. You can mark behaviors. You can mark age and sex. You can put in comments just for the photo. For camera images, it'll automatically upload the camera specifications because that's part of the file for photos. For audio recordings, you can go in and add the sound recording equipment. Sound recording equipment doesn't automatically include itself in the file metadata.
And that third question, it's kind of a longer question, but kind of the idea is something like Harry Moss Park. It's a big, large park. I start, kind of at the bottom right-hand corner. The hotspot's kind of about 2 miles away, right, somewhere else on the park.
Mhm.
Is that something where you would just want e-birders to select Harry Moss, or is that something where they can use those personal hotspots for those?
That is something where I would suggest using the main hotspot. Since the park is pretty big, we know people are often birding the whole park, so it's okay to do that, even though you might be some distance from the actual location pin for the hotspot.
Okay. I think those are the three questions that came up in the chat. Karen, I didn't miss anything, did I?
I don't see anything. Is Audacity the best sound editing program to use to edit your audio recordings?
Audacity is a very good sound editing program. It's one of the ones that I started out using and still use quite a bit. There are some other options. OSIN Audio is one. It's one of the free options. There's actually a few of them listed in the help section on eBird. If you go into looking how to edit audio recordings, it'll even take you to links to download these programs.
I know I have had some people ask me questions about entering sex, if you know that,
Hmm.
on like something easy like a cardinal.
Hmm.
Most of us don't bother with that, but I see that on a lot of your checklists. Is that something you recommend we take that extra time to do?
You can do it if you want to. It's not necessary.
Okay. And ages, if you know the age
Yes.
of a bald eagle or something
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. For something easy like that, you can go ahead and put that in.
Another question we got was for rare birds.
Hmm.
If there's a rare bird at Harry Moss, for example, do you want the actual GPS coordinates for that rare bird, or is it still just okay to mark?
If you want other people to be able to find it easy, they might be able to appreciate it, but we don't specifically need that within eBird. That's just more of a courtesy to other birders if you want to put that information out there.
If it's a rare bird that I'd like, yes, please add GPS location for me.
If you don't want to cover the whole 2 miles of the park searching for an Acadian flycatcher.
That's enough. Blaine, could you possibly share your screen and show us about tagging photos on that and entering that extra information on additional species in your photos or additional birds on your recordings?
Sure. Give me a minute to bring that up.
And I know it's in that managed media, but I don't
Mhm.
think a lot of us have used that often. And that's something a lot of us could add to our eBird practices.
Right. So this is something that will pop up as soon as you start uploading photos onto a checklist. Let me know once this is loaded for
Yeah,
everyone.
shared now.
Okay, so this is a checklist that has the gray kingbird that showed up down in Houston this summer. So when you upload the photo, if you select the photo, you can go in, put in notes on the right side, additional species that are in the photo on the right side, information on the age and sex of the bird, rate it, tag any of the behaviors it's exhibiting, tag things like habitat, if there's a visible nest, if it's molting, if it's a flock, if it's an aberrant individual, so if it was something that was leucistic, had patches of white feathers on it, and so on. You can even rearrange the order that photos display on your checklist now. This was something that was added earlier this summer to eBird.
And then it works the same on the audio recordings where you can
Yes, it does.
other
The,
species.
the exact same.
Surely there are more questions.
Hey, I actually had one. I was looking at the eBird help pages the other day and found something I'd never saw before, where it encouraged us to not report zero counts of birds, which
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
done several times out birding, and I miss a very common bird that I'm very surprised. So I'll put a zero count in there and a note saying, "Wow, I'm surprised I didn't see red-bellied woodpecker here today. Not sure what's going on." What's the thought process behind that?
Well, you didn't see it, so it's not necessary to put it on a checklist. That's why.
Fair enough.
So by just not having it on the checklist, you're telling
That is automatically a count of zero by not having it on a checklist.
makes sense. I don't know if you covered this in the beginning and I missed it, but checklist comments, what checklist comments are useful or needed? I see a lot of people write long comments. Is that just comments for yourself or does eBird want something in our comments? Like the ring to
That's
be
another thing that's not necessary for eBird data. It's another thing that could be useful for other birders, though.
like Christian, that would be telling me where to find all the rare birds you find. What trail to go to at Campion.
Or you could have a very low number of species on a list in a spot where you usually see a lot of birds, and it's because it started raining halfway through. You could remark that it started raining halfway through, which would let other birders know that normally this place is better, but the weather interfered.
I did want to ask one other question. Maybe you could talk to, I have had people tell me that they think that submitting eBird data is useless because so many new birders are out there that don't know what they're identifying. And I've had some high level birders tell me they don't participate because they think it's filled with a bunch of trash. But eBird does have a way of sorting that out in the algorithms,
Yes.
don't they? So
There are a lot of different ways that are used to filter the data that are used in the science aspects of eBird. So when I mentioned complete checklists, anything that's not complete checklist is already thrown out of all the scientific analyses. All the scientific analyses, you'd have to talk to somebody on eBird status and trends to get the full explanation of all this because they can go on for sometimes 2 hours about everything that goes into this. But Shorter checklists are prioritized in terms of both distance and time. Checklists that are usually from the first half of the morning are prioritized because birds are most active and people are most likely to report the highest species totals then. And they have some algorithms for teasing out which are the most useful checklists from an area. It's called a species accumulation curve. So they're kind of comparing all the checklists from a site together and picking which ones fit that algorithm to be most useful for status and trends.
So if I go out in the middle of the day in the afternoon and it's kind of raining and I don't see much there at all, but I submit my checklist with a few birds I've seen, that's all taken into account, that I was,
Yes, it is.
the day I was there, and the fact that it was raining,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that maybe I'm a new birder that hasn't submitted a lot of checklists. Are we rated as eBirders with the value of our checklists?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, there's some questions coming in the chat that I had noticed. There's one about when there's a track for a checklist, can that serve it as a location alone? So locations are automatically created as soon as you start a track, but then you have to select if you want it to be a personal location or a hotspot. So the location is already begun as soon as you have a track. You can kind of switch over what location that the track is assigned to. I hope that answers the question. There's one about what number should you put if you see a barn swallow fly by and then 5 minutes later you see one fly by again in the same area? This depends. If there seem to be barn swallows passing through, you can put that there's 2 barn swallows, but if you think it's likely it's the same barn swallow, then only put 1.
And then similar to the barn swallow, I also had a question about like a chickadee.
Mm-hmm.
If I see a chickadee at the feeder and I see more and more at the feeder over like 2 hours birding in the backyard,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same one, but I'm seeing maybe several chickadees at the same feeder. So should I put one or like several?
So usually, that is a good question, Jameson. Thanks for that. Usually you try to go with the most cautious count. So if you're only seeing one at a time, then only go with one. If you see multiples of them at any point, then you put the highest number that you've seen.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to throw out a question to you, Blaine, about the breeding birds comments when you submit checklists.
Yes.
I have seen more inexperienced birders, especially in migration, flag every bird in their checklist about possible breeding, inappropriate habitat when we know that a bird isn't going to breed here.
Breeding in Texas.
The other kind of similar question is, my counsel to most of the people that have asked me questions on this is really, unless you see the bird at a nest or with the youngsters in the nest, is to just kind of ignore that data entry. Do you have a take on that, or?
So the breeding bird codes within eBird have so far only been used in states that have breeding bird atlases going on. That's what these codes were developed for. We're not likely to ever have a full-on breeding bird atlas in Texas just because those are incredibly intensive surveys, and we're a huge state with a lot of just completely inaccessible areas to the public. But if you do want to put those in, be sure to read the help pages in eBird about how those codes apply. I had thought about including that in the presentation tonight, but that would have probably added another 15 minutes of me talking.
Yes.
So breeding bird codes, when they are applied, are only supposed to be meant for species that are breeding in that area during the breeding season.
Great.
So if you're saying that if I hear a bird singing in migration,
It doesn't necessarily mean it's stopping there. They tune up and start singing on the wintering grounds before they move north.
Okay, so just because it's singing in Dallas, I don't want to mark that singing breeding code.
That's correct.
Because it's not actually breeding here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a question about how you find out who the eBird reviewers are by county. This depends just entirely on if you've heard from a reviewer before. The reviewer roster tends to change over time as people come in and out. And sometimes the counties that we're handling change, so it could be in flux. So you'll have to wait till you hear from a reviewer. And I know some reviewers care more about their privacy than others and only want to really be contacting people in the case of review. There's another question about saving a few Merlin audio files. Yes, they are of value. If you are able to upload them to a checklist at any point, then we can use them. We can put them in the archive and put them to use to helping train Merlin more.
Does that include incidental checklists?
Yes. We can use media from incidental checklists to train Merlin.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain the reason you've added that eBird has added the other animal photos? What is being done with that data, or is that just for us to be able to show off our bobcat photos?
When Macaulay Library started, back when it was just called the Library of Natural Sounds, it was all animals. It wasn't just birds. It's just birds happen to be the easiest things to get audio recordings of. And because it was associated with the lab of ornithology, then birds ended up being the most photographs in there too. But it is for everything. So we're trying to get a little bit back to the library's roots on that. There's some really cool audio of animals in there. You should check them out sometime, now that folks are able to search through those.
Any more questions? Seems like everybody really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Blaine.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks a lot. And everybody have a good night and start upping your eBird game and submitting more audio. I know I'm going to try. Thank you all for coming, and we'll send out a recording later with some more information, and look forward to more programs from Audubon Dallas. Thanks.